Hello everyone, welcome back to AP Euro, Unit 3 review session. This is good for unit tests or for if you're, cramming in right before the exam, this would be good. And I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm not going to yap about the stuff that I usually do yap about, and I'm just going to go right into it. Subscribe. Okay, so this unit is about absolutism and constitutionalism. Table of contents, you'll see. But seriously, we're just going to cover the content, and then at the end, we'll do some quizzing. And I'm also going to tell you how to study on your own time. Anyway, definition. Biggest definition of this unit. Absolutism. Absolutism is a ruler having complete or absolute power over a country, or at least trying to have that. And this is all kinds of power, like political power, religious power, social power. They're trying to control as much of that as possible. They're trying to make sure that the nobles have as little power as possible, that the merchants, that the church has as little power as possible. They want all that power for themselves. Divine right monarchy is an absolute monarchy, but being endorsed, claiming to be endorsed by God. And in simple terms, it's saying, God made me king, so you have to obey me. That's the justification for absolutism. And there is lots of overlap between absolute monarchy and divine right monarchy. Almost all absolutists are divine right monarchs, with the exception of Cromwell. Yeah, but you'll learn about him later. So, Louis XIV. Whoa. Louis XIV jump scare. Scary. He was a scary dude. He was the absolutist, and all the other absolutists in Europe modeled after him. And he was called the Sun King because it was, excuse my terms, but it was really like glazing. They would call him the Sun King because he illuminated everything, because he was perfect. And they would just say this because they wanted to have Louis XIV. The nobles would say this because they wanted Louis XIV to support them. It was kind of like being a teacher's pet. So he made the palace or court of Versailles for a few reasons. This palace or court of Versailles was a massive palace where he and a lot of his nobles and administration would stay, and they would be doing that. That's where they oversaw the administration of France. And he did this so that he could weaken nobility, because he wanted to distract the nobles with jobs and parties there, instead of having them run their own lands, because he wanted to run their lands. So he would just distract the nobles, kind of like throwing them a bone, have this position inside of my court, like be the master of the parties, meanwhile I run your land and you lose power. And the nobles were fine with it, because they would just party there, and they would be good with it. So it worked out for him. And he also did this to increase his prestige. You're a lot cooler if you have a massive mansion. And he also did this so you could have more power over administration, like I said before. Well, actually not like I said before, but if your administration is like happening right where you live, and that means that you're more proximus to it. You can more easily control it because you're closer to it. So the Sun King repeals the Edict of Nantes. If you remember this from last unit, the Edict of Nantes said that Huguenots are allowed in France, but only in certain areas of France. So he repeals this, and this caused lots of civil unrest from Huguenots, but he doesn't care. And he spends a lot of money on wars. Oh, and he did that to increase centralization, by the way. Last unit, I made an analogy about tentacles of power, the way that a king controls his country. You have political tentacles, you have economic tentacles, you have social tentacles, and an important tentacle is religious tentacles. Trying to control your population through making them subscribe to your religion, and from there you can do so much more. You have their loyalty, because if you can make them say, if you can make your populace say, you, Sir King, are king because God made you king, then that gives you so much power. So he wants his people to say that. So he tries converting them to Catholic by repealing the Edict of Nantes. Anyway, that was a yap. But he spends a lot of money on the wars in Palace, so he faces financial issues. And who does he call in to help with these? Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He was a mercantilist, and the mercantilism is an icky word. I don't like this, even though I really like economics. Mercantilism is just a weird word. And in effect, it looked like making new industry and infrastructure. But in theory, what mercantilism is trying to grab up the limited resources and wealth of the world for yourself, and then hoarding that wealth, hoarding that gold. And it would emphasize things like exporting more than you import so that you can get more gold and have more power. They thought that gold and silver reserves was the true sign of power, of economic power and wealth. And yeah, it was quite a violent economic philosophy. It thought it was all about competition. It was all about, I want to have more gold than my neighbors, so I'm going to import a little and export a lot. He goes to war a lot. In here we can see his gains that he's made. Everything, the greens, the light green and the dark green is everything that France had beforehand, along with the yellow. Is everything that France had beforehand. And then this orangey color is everything that France gains during Louis XIV's reign. He fought a lot of wars. And he was able to win all this land because he made a professional army. So he fought in the War of the Spanish Succession. And I'm going to see if I have a dedicated slide. I do. Yay. So the War of the Spanish Succession was formerly Habsburg Spain getting passed down to Louis XIV's grandson. This formerly Habsburg Spain was it was ruled, it's so tragic. The Habsburgs, they inbred so much to the point where one of their poor sons was so deformed and disabled to the point where he died very early. And this son, he left his kingdom, he made his heir Louis XIV's grandson. So that meant that when Louis XIV died, when Louis XIV's son died, that would mean that Louis XIV's grandson would own both Spain and France. And that is a continental, worldwide superpower. You're combining Spain, who, as we'll learn later in the chapter, is falling off a little bit, but still is very strong, with the strongest country in Europe, and you're combining them. And that is lethal, that is dangerous. So, Great Britain, here, Portugal, Austria, Prussia, Netherlands, they all gang up. The Avengers assemble, and they try to stop this from happening, and they win. They win this war, and they stop this super state from forming. And the way it happens is that they say, okay, Louis XIV's grandson, yeah, you can get the throne, but France and Spain are never allowed to unite under the same person. So Louis XIV's grandson gains the throne of Spain, but loses out on gaining the throne of France. Speaking of Spain, there was a Spanish fall off because of the Price Revolution, no centralization, inefficient government, and the Netherlands revolt. And if you're unfamiliar with the term Price Revolution, it was the horrible inflation that occurred to Spain especially. It was all of Europe, but Spain especially experienced this price revolution. And the reason why it happened is because they were mining up all of this gold from the New World and shipping it back to Spain. And because they used gold as their currency in Spain, this caused inflation. If you're familiar with this kind of basic principle of economics, the more of a currency that you have, the more that stuff costs. That's kind of just like how it is. Like, another example is during the 2020 COVID recession. there's some cool name for it, like Corona recession. I don't know. The way that our government tried handling the economic impact of so much less tax dollars is that we just printed money. And that caused inflation that we saw going forward. So Spain fell off from the #1 world power to a secondary power. Prussia. Before this, they were a weak electorate. And an electorate is one of the 8 countries which chooses the Holy Roman Emperor inside the Holy Roman Empire. And it's stronger than a prince, but weaker than a king. But Frederick William the Great Elector, he was the first important Prussian monarch, and he elevated Prussia from an electorate to a country which has a king. Not a kingdom, but a country which has a king. It's kind of confusing. And just so you know, Prussia is in the northeast of Germany. They're going to eventually go on to form Germany. And that's why we're learning about them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be learning about them. But we're learning about them because they would go on to form Germany. So Frederick William the Great Elector, first important Prussian monarch, he became a king in Prussia. He didn't become king of Prussia, but he became a king of Prussia, which is confusing. But it happened because Poland and Austria didn't want to make Prussia a kingdom, but they wanted to make Prussia's ruler a king. It's weird. You can do some more. You can do your own research on it if you want. It's interesting, but it's weird. And he makes the state strong and absolute. He strengthens mercantilist policies, so exporting a lot, importing a little, hoarding up golds. And he limited nobles' rights and power, but still allowed them to have control over peasants. So what he did is he kind of made a balance. He made a trade. He said to the nobles, I will give you positions in this larger bureaucracy and army, but in exchange, you're going to have to give up some of the privileges that you have, like not having to pay taxes, for example. So this worked. The nobles, the short-sighted nobles, they said, yeah, I would love to be an officer in the army. I would love to be the governor of this state inside of Prussia. So they exchanged privileges for positions in army and bureaucracy. And if you're not sure what bureaucracy is, that's like the governmental apparatus. You can look it up if you still don't know. Austria is uncentralized because, I mean, just look at how large their kingdom is. Look at all the different nationalities. They speak Italian down here. They speak Flemish up here. They speak I don't know if Bohemian's a word. Or Czech. They speak Czech up here. It's hard to be centralized when you have all these different nationalities. So they're uncentralized, but they're gaining geopolitical power because they're just strong. They have a large country and they're gaining geopolitical power. And they are 1v1ing the Ottomans, and they're kind of winning. In Italy, Charles V, who's this Austrian guy, cooks the French, and yeah, I don't like the French, so I censor their name. He cooks the French in Italy, and Austria becomes the arbiter of Italy. They become the controller of Italy, instead of the French who were beforehand, and the Spanish who were beforehand. Russia. So Russia is, at the start of this, with Ivan the Terrible, they were this orange part, purple part, blue part, and the green part. So a large country, and they are soon to expand. So Ivan the Terrible, and they call him the Terrible because the nobles really didn't like him. He made a lot of centralizing and anti-noble moves. So they called him Ivan the Terrible. He nerfed the boyars, and he also experiences the time of troubles, which was a horrible time in Russia. Civil wars, economic collapse, and confusion. And there was also a schism in the Russian Orthodox Church, so kind of like a divide, like with the Great Schism. So Peter the Great is the guy who came after Ivan the Terrible, and you can see his expansion of Russia on this map here. He gained some land here, 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 and here. And he was a westernizer. Excuse me, I skipped the point. He was an absolutist. He nerfed boyar power. He nerfs boyar power. He makes more power for himself. And he was also a westernizer. He sees the Russian economy and society is backward, and he tries to westernize it. And cool story. Before he became king, he went on this voyage, or I think it was after he became king, he went on this voyage throughout Europe, and he saw all this new technology, all this new mercantilism, and he was like, why can't Russia be like this? Why isn't Russia like this? So he tries to westernize Russia, and he becomes mercantilist. He tries building a navy, and he cuts off boyars' beards. He makes them stop wearing dresses, because he sees that as non-Western, and he wants to become Western. And he also tries to incorporate more technology. So he fights and beats Sweden in the Great Northern War for a warm water port, because he wanted to get a warm water port so that he could build a navy. And if you don't know what a warm water port means, it means that a port that doesn't freeze over the winter. Pete the Builder. He builds St. Petersburg from the ground up in newly conquered lands from the Swedish. Right here, you can see the label on there, St. Petersburg. And it is Western. It is a trade city, and it is very Western. So the Ottomans stopped being as aggressive as they were before. They were kind of just trying to push into Europe as best they can, and they start being more peaceful with the rest of Europe. They start trading more, and they get beaten back by the Austrians. Poland's ignore this silly figure. It's weak, it's uncentralized, and it has outsiders chosen as kings through elections from the nobles. And the reason why it's so weak and uncentralized is because of the Sejm. The noble parliament, which, excuse me, I am returning back now. So the reason why they were so weak and uncentralized is because of this noble parliament that they have, which is called the Sejm. I probably butchered that. I'm sorry to all my Polish American viewers out there. They made it so that any decision that was made in this noble parliament, the Sejm, had to be unanimous. So anyone in this noble parliament can override any agreement that they make. So this makes an administrative freeze. Can you imagine the US Congress if every single congressperson had to agree to something? That would be insane. Nothing would happen. So yeah, there's an administrative freeze in Poland. They become even more weak, even more uncentralized. The Dutch, though, they were experiencing a golden age. The Dutch Republic becomes independent from the Spanish after the 80 Years' War, and it ends in a Dutch victory. And there's two major factions in the Dutch political domestic life. There's the stadtholders / the Orangists, who were the governors, the commanders, the more pro-king people. And the more pro-king, more pro-centralization, more conservative people, versus the States Generals / Republicans, who were the federal representatives, and they were, as you could tell, more pro-republic. They were anti-king. So, yes, stadtholders wanted more centralization, States Generals wanted more local power. William III dies, he was the Dutch monarch, and a republic is made since there's no heir. They're just like, okay, guess there's no heir. Okay, guess we're a republic now. You remember this? This is from Unit 1, and it's saying the Dutch making a lot of money in this area. They're still making mad stacks because of capitalism. And capitalism, if you had to define it, was the idea that wealth can be created. There is no such thing as finite wealth, and wealth can be created through trade and the division of labor. So the Dutch set up joint stock companies, which are accounted for by new fancy banks like the Bank of Amsterdam, which use double entry bookkeeping. So that's probably a jumble of words to most of you out there. Joint stock companies is when a bunch of private investors chip in on one venture instead of it being just funded by one person. So they chip in to a venture, which would usually be a voyage to the Dutch East Indies to make trades, and then come back and sell it at a higher price. And then when they come back, and when the merchants sell it at exorbitant prices, they will share the profits in the same proportions, in the same ratios as they shared with the as they contributed to the investment. So it's kind of like a stock market, and it's accounted for by banks of like the Bank of Amsterdam. And double entry bookkeeping is just like the modern version of accounting. It's just making sure that like I don't know why they even tell us this. They could just say modern accounting, but it's just modern accounting. You should know double entry bookkeeping, it might come out. So I already said this, and they keep doing this, they get rich. They get rich off this trading. And it makes Amsterdam become the financial and commercial center of Europe. But wars are hurting the economy. English Civil War, perhaps the biggest topic in this unit. Perhaps I made too much on this, but it is split into 6 rulers. And the easiest way that I see people remember this is James Charles. Cromwell, Charles, James. James Charles is a good way to remember it if you're chronically online. Now let's break it down. James the First, he was a divine right absolutist. So he was a Scottish king. He inherited the English throne too, and he united England and Scotland. And he was a Puritan when he came. I don't know if it was Puritan or Presbyterian, so I'm just going to check that real quick. Sorry. Okay, so it turns out that he was Puritan. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. Alright, back in here. So he was Puritan, turns out, which is kind of insane. But the Anglicans didn't like the fact that he was Puritan, and James I liked Anglican anyway, so he leaned Anglican during his rule. And the House of Commons during this time became more Puritan. Much more Puritans came in for whatever reason. And he made the King James Bible, which was the first successful translation of the Bible into English. And that is a more Protestant take to translate the Bible. He was a divine right absolutist. He believed that the king should be able to do whatever he wants, and this is to the Parliament's dismay. So usually the parliamentary consent is required for raising taxes, but James I bypassed this because he didn't want to deal with the Parliament. He wanted to have his own absolute power. He didn't want to have to run it by Parliament. So he bypassed it by getting shipping money. And basically this is the king going up to coastal towns which can make ships and saying, okay, so you're either going to make me a certain amount of ships for my navy, or you're going to pay me in taxes. So he'd go up to all these coastal towns and make them pay in taxes, and it worked. So Charles I, he dies, and he loses his throne to Charles I. He's the second Stuart. And like father, like son, he was a divine right absolutist. He believed that the king should be able to do whatever he wants. And he also faces a similar problem of not wanting to have to deal with Parliament. So he does shipping money again, and Parliament petitions him because they're annoyed. They want to, have their voices heard. They want to be able to talk about taxation. So what they do is they give him the petition of right. They petition him with the petition of right. They say, please don't tax without our consent. Please don't imprison us without proper cause. Please don't quarter your troops in our houses without our consent. And Charles is like, yeah, I'll do that, but he doesn't actually. And this leads to the 11 years tyranny. From 1629, Charles I didn't convene Parliament once, which is super tyrannical. And during this time, he enforced strict Anglican uniformity. He made the Book of Common Prayer, which was Anglican. He forced it onto Protestants he forced it onto Presbyterians in Scotland. So the Scots and the Irish, because they were also having this forced down their throats, are getting mad. So Charles needs money, because in order to fight someone, you need money to pay people to fight for you. So Charles has to ask Parliament to raise taxes, which means that Parliament's like, dude, you just ghosted us for 11 years. It's like, imagine you're dating someone and you ghost her for 10 years, and then you say, hey babe, can you give me some money? I'm kind of low on cash right now. They're gonna be super mad, and Parliament is super mad. So, as I said here, Parliament says, bro, you've ghosted us for 11 years. Charles says, didn't ask, don't care, give me money. And Parliament says, only if you treat us right. Let Parliament have many more privileges. Abide by the things that you agreed to in the petition of right, but then disregard it. Abide by those. Don't break that promise again. And then Charles I says no. Instead of listening to you and trying to be diplomatic, what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrest your leaders who are against me. And this leads to civil war. Because when Charles I tries to arrest Parliament leaders, he fails. He flees London. So Charles gets his loyalists, they're called cavaliers, and this consisted of the nobility and the clergy. And Parliament gets their parliamentarian Roundhead army, and they fight. And the people who supported the Parliament were merchants, Puritans, gentry, and they fight. So the Roundhead, Thomas Fairfax, makes this new model army, which was this very advanced, zealous, meritocratic and highly disciplined army. Meritocratic means that it would give you positions based off of your skill, not based off of your lineage like it would be before. Less nepotism. And Oliver Cromwell, he is the cavalry commander for this. The Roundheads win, and Charles I is captured. He's put on trial for tyranny, and he's the first king to be put on trial. I would recommend you watch the video, Can a King Be Put on Trial? It's by Historia Civilis. Very interesting video. And he's executed. Parliament rules now. And there was a 5-year period of Commonwealth, 5-year period of Republic. So they say, shoot, the king's dead. We've had a king for millennia. What do we do now? So they decide to make a real parliament. They kick out all the Presbyterians from the parliament, and they go radical. And they abolish the monarchy, they abolish the House of Lords, and the House of Lords was like the aristocracy, basically. The people who held positions just because of their lineage. And they made a republic. And this was a republic which was dominated by Cromwell. But it failed. There was no public support. Everyone still liked the king. There was a bad economy, and there was unfair religious control because, it was largely Puritan. So they would enforce Puritan ideals like banning music and certain quite controlling measures. So then Cromwell takes over as Lord Protector, which is basically dictator of England. He's a strict Puritan. He makes stuff like music illegal, but promotes religious tolerance for Protestants. And he brutally put down Irish and Scottish revolts, and he dies. No one replaces him. Well, that's not true. His son tries replacing him, but no one likes him. So in effect, no one replaces him. And then Charles II comes back, and the Stuarts are back. He reigns for 25 years. People miss the monarchy, so it's reestablished after Cromwell dies. And Charles II comes back. He is a Catholic, and Parliament does not like this. So he wants to get toleration for all the Christian sects, because Catholicism is a minority sect in this country, in England at this time, not in America. But Parliament blocks him, and even in retaliation, they make the Test Act, which is basically making it so that if you want to be in public office, you have to be, you can't be Catholic. So there's two factions in the parliamentary debates. The Whigs say James II, Charles II's son and heir, should be king because he is Catholic. And then the Tories say, no, he should be because he's the king's son, so he has to be the next king. And the Tories win the argument, but it's not forever. The Whigs win ultimately, and here we go. He was Catholic, he was explicitly Catholic, and he undid a lot of religious persecution on Catholics and minority Christian groups, and he put Catholics in high positions, so Parliament is mad. So then what does Parliament do? This. So Parliament talking to Willie and Mary. Yo. Willie says, yeah, Parliament? It's like, want to be my king? You're so cool and Protestant. Our king right now is Catholic and he sucks. You can be our king, just sign a paper called the Bill of Rights and let the Parliament dominate you. And it's like, sounds good. So then Parliament asks, you'd have to give us parliamentary freedom of speech, raising an army with Parliament consent, free elections, no taxation without Parliament consent. Is this good? He's like, yeah. So he takes over in the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary of Orange, they're Dutch Protestants, and they took over England in a bloodless revolution. They're hands off and they kind of just let Parliament do all the work. And that is a through line for the rest of British history. Past this point, Parliament is supreme to the king, because the Parliament just chose their king by inviting William and Mary over and getting rid of Charles II. Overall, throughout this entire time, England was expanding colonially, and they built up some nice colonies through all this madness. So this is the final thing here. There are two opposing viewpoints relating to constitutionalism and absolutism. Locke is a constitutionalist. He is called the father of liberalism, and not liberalism as in like bleeding blue, like bleeding heart liberal that we would see today in America, but wanting as little government intervention as possible, wanting the smallest government as possible. And his major work was treatises on government. So he said government is a necessary evil, and it should be limited and controlled through a constitution. He said that mankind had certain inalienable natural rights that God gave us, and he wanted a constitution to protect them from the state. He also said that people should choose the government in a social contract, and he was classist. He thought the wealthy should rule. And now his opposite, who was also an Englishman from around this time, he said that government is necessary, just as Locke said. Without it, we would live short and brutish lives in the state of nature, in a brutish, ugly, barbaric kind of life. So he said that we need an absolute monarch with undivided power to maintain peace, since that is the most important thing. Peace is the most important thing, he said. So now quizzing. Who was Colbert? Colbert was the finance minister for Louis XIV. He was a mercantilist, and he was very good at his job. What's the difference between absolutism and divine right monarchy? This one's a tricky question because there's lots of overlap. But divine right monarchies are always absolutists, but absolutists aren't always divine right monarchy. Absolutists is like a part of divine right monarchy. It's the complete control of government by a king or a ruler. And divine right monarchy is an absolutist king or queen which claims that he should be absolutist, he or she should be absolutist because of their bestowment of the position by God. What was the War of Spanish Succession? The War of the Spanish Succession was a conflict between Louis XIV and his grandson versus Great Britain, Portugal, Prussia, Austria, and the Netherlands over who should inherit the Spanish throne. If you remember, Louis XIV's grandson was given it, but then everyone was like, yo, if this happens, then there's going to be a super state. We got to block this. And so they go to war against each other. And the coalition between England's Portugal, Austria, Prussia, and Netherlands ends up winning. Name the sequence of rulers following James I. James I, Charles I, Cromwell, Charles II, James II, William of Orange. Who is the Lord Protector? What was his innovating fighting force called? The Lord Protector is Oliver Cromwell. And his innovative fighting force was called the New Model Army. How to study on your own. Video link. I will not be showing this video. I guess I'll just have to explain it out loud then. In my opinion, the best way to study on your own is to go through this slideshow, or what you can do is go through your textbook and kind of just go over the content and yap about it. Yap about it to someone, or have them yap about it to you, and then either you or they will go into a Google Doc and outline everything that they say. And then when you're finished with that, you would go through it, you would go through the outline, and you would see what you do and don't understand. And then you would focus on that, you would quiz each other on it, you would explain it to each other, and boom, you're good. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. I will try my best to respond to you, but please understand that I am a student too, so it is difficult for me, especially around AP season. Thank you, and good luck on your tests or your exam.